So this is part 2 of my video about mushrooms and psilocybin in general. I'm thinking that most likely when I recorded last time on this topic, I might have been in an elevated hypomania state, possibly. And so I wanted to create a more grounded video that brings all the information that you need to know about psilocybin and autism in one place. Because I think that harm reduction is really important. And in a lot of discussions involving psychedelics, that nuance tends to get lost. I think people don't really realize how crucial it is to prioritize harm reduction in any context that involves psychedelics. And so this here is my disclaimer that if you or anyone you know is trying or using psychedelics for any reason, know that it's not risk-free. I mean, nothing in life is ever risk-free, but just know that the consequences can be pretty intense, you know, whether that's latent bipolar disorder or schizophrenia or other things. So mushrooms kind of work by revealing the underlying structure of your own neurology. They don't really create new conditions, so to speak. They more kind of reveal them, as I learned the hard way with some hypomania and manic episodes from trying to resolve problems. And in my case, I tried it many times years ago, did many macrodoses on my own, trying to resolve my autistic sensory issues, which I will be making a different video to target because I have found some solutions for that to an extent. But I did want to caution you on that path. And so I'll get started by sharing some personal anecdotes with you about my experiences, things to watch out for, and hopefully then you can make the best decisions for you. And so to get started, basically, and I realized that in 2023, when I had been going through a mania episode in 2023, a lot of my psychotic delusions were actually tied to a playlist that I created back in 2022 and had done a macrodose with. So I had been listening to music, and because I'm autistic and take things very, very hyper literally in altered states, you can imagine how that might be a problem. So pick any playlist really and take every single song title quite literally. I mean, as literally as you possibly can, and then create a dream out of it, because that's basically what it was like. I mean, so there was, of course, some stressors and triggers to that event. It wasn't like I just woke up manic one day. I actually had been stuck in a cult, left the cult, which you probably already have heard from my other episode about cults. And it was a really stressful time. It threw me straight into full-blown mania. Terrifying, absolutely terrifying. First time I'd ever been in mania before. And so I can kind of speak on a little bit about what that was like. But before I do that, I'd like to help you understand that. So basically what psychedelics do is they allow you to rewrite portions of your neural architecture. Psychedelics allow you to rewrite what I like to call your own neural contracts. Neural contracts meaning things that you think that you believe that you have to do, or if you have to be a certain way or do a certain thing, your habits, kind of like, it's not just habits though, it's like at the core of who you are, things that you've built your identity scaffolding around, things that you have decided you have to do for this. Like, I'll give an example. One of the neural contracts I learned when I was a kid was that everyone in my family has strong legs. And so that reprogramming happened often enough that now my legs are kind of freakishly strong compared to the rest of my body. It's really no wonder. It was a neural contract that I had to have strong legs. And so basically psychedelics kind of wipe the slate, so to speak, in terms of neural contracts. They don't necessarily get rid of existing ones unless, you're working with a therapist who can actually help you do that, which I would highly recommend, by the way. I think the really biggest tool that psychedelics can be useful for is in conjunction with working with a therapist who's trained in that. I do think it's unfortunate that it's understudied and there's not a whole lot of therapists offering that kind of therapy. But if there ever is, it would be groundbreaking to be able to have someone who knows what they're doing and to redirect you to attunement while you're in an altered state. So basically, when you take psilocybin, or mushrooms as they're commonly called, different areas of the brain start to increase in global communication. So you have different pathways talking to each other, interacting with each other in different ways, like ways that are outside of your usual. And it also comes with it some default mode network suppression. So what that means is the default mode is kind of like your autopilot mode, also the part of your brain that is responsible for your default sense of who you are. So if you think this is me, I am me, this is who I am, that's probably the default mode network being activated, at least. Of course, there are other brain areas that work with that network. That's why they call it a network. It's not just, standalone. It's all in the same system. And so when you take mushrooms or psychedelics in general, you are creating this extremely fertile ground for new neural contracts to take hold. And this can be either fantastically empowering, like lessons learned from therapy, maybe learning that it's okay to be vulnerable, maybe learning that you're worthy of love, maybe realizing that you're not defined by the traumas that you experienced and that you don't have to keep holding on to those protective mechanisms. That would be a few, helpful, useful neural contracts, I would probably say. And so some negative ones, I'm definitely not going to give an exhaustive list here, but I am going to give you some examples using the playlist that created my manic delusions as an example. So, one of these songs in the playlist is called Candy Wrappers. So when I was manic, I saw candy wrappers on the ground, and I thought it was my dead grandpa trying to contact me and talk to me, which of course triggered the whole grief cycle because I miss him and all that, in that altered state. Then there was a song by Tool. Yeah, I don't recommend listening to Tool on psychedelics. I mean, if you're a masochist, maybe do that if you really like pain. But it freaked me out retroactively. So there's a song called 46 and 2 by Tool that my dad had shown me a while back, like I think a year prior or something. And I had heard that song in the altered state, and I became completely convinced that this must represent some kind of a magic number that only my dad knows the answer to. And when I was a kid, he would play this whole magic number game with me all the time, try to guess the number. The magic number usually was either some version of 7 with a million sevens behind it, or 13. So obviously that triggered a pretty intense delusion where it was like, okay, I have to try to figure out what is the magic number that only dad knows. But then let's keep going here. Another one of the song titles was called Fallen Angel by Spangle. I'm a huge fan of Spangle. It's pretty great. But if you know anything about a fallen angel, you also probably know it has a lot of ties to Lucifer archetypes and mythology. And so if you really start to look into Lucifer of any kind, you start to, learn a lot. You can probably imagine how it would have been intense and not pleasant necessarily to go through an entire exiled arc from people don't want to talk to me and are excluding me, kind of similar to the autistic experience, circling it all the way back to, oh, wait, now I can break free of all my illusions? This is wild. So that one actually did have a positive net result at the cost of almost losing my mind and almost probably dying internally from how intense mania was. And so then some of the other titles of this playlist, Must Be a Cop. Yeah, that was a scary one. I thought the cops were after me. Why? I didn't know. I was just really freaked out in that mania episode. And then Foreigner's God. I think that title's pretty self-explanatory for why that might be a scary experience. But then there were some weird ones. So when I was manic, I heard a voice that kept saying, Shibuya, Shibuya, like over and over and over again. I was like, what the heck does Shibuya mean? Well, it was a song. It was a song title from in this playlist. And I'm just like figuring this out. I almost feel embarrassed. But the thing is that this kind of a trap can happen to anybody. And psychedelics create a extremely subconsciously receptive state where you can change any action and any belief. Any action and any belief. Imagine how powerful that would be, in the wrong hands. In my case, I was getting out of a cult while one of the people in the cult kept trying to talk to me and make contact. And she had at one point tried to convince me that I was her dying grandmother named Maria. And so, in a neuroplasticity state, the brain adopts what it hears as truth. And if that is unchecked, that can lead to massive problems. So in that last example, with her grandmother was dying. Her grandmother was also not breathing well. So what happened for me when I believed I was her grandmother? I started having panic attacks. I started breathing incorrectly. I started literally, my whole nervous system changed to a completely different baseline. It was very bad, very toxic, very harmful to me, because when I was in that neuroplastic state, I had been predisposed to information and ideas that harmed me. Now, I obviously can't blame her completely. She was a total manipulator, and I'm so glad I cut contact for sure. But that's not the point here. The point is that it was still my responsibility to make sure that I manage the situations that I am in, that I create safety for myself. But the thing is, it's really hard to do that when you're trapped in a cult. So you can probably imagine how all of these dynamics led to very unhealthy neural contracts formed that harmed me. But I don't want you to get the idea that it's all negative, because it's not. Psychedelics are absolutely an incredible tool. Psychedelics have freed me from almost every trauma I've ever experienced. And I mean that quite literally, because it allows you to not only rewire your existing neural contracts, but to question the ones that are there. Because how can you change if you're not aware of who and what you are? And I don't know if I would have ever come to that realization without having tried psychedelics. Knowing who I am and believing in her and loving her with total confidence. I'm really not sure if I would have ever truly felt confident like I feel now without those experiences. I don't know. I probably would still be trapped under some sort of programming without it. Programming installed in childhood. Okay, so now let's take a look at that. In childhood, why are kids so susceptible to new information? Neural plasticity. What triggers neuroplasticity in adults? Well, there's a lot of things, but psilocybin happens to be one of those things that triggers a lot of neuroplasticity. And so it's kind of tragic, really, because the very thing that can heal and help people break out of their patterns and break out of their traumas and remind us that we're connected to other people and that we're loved by the entire universe itself is also the possible source of the greatest harm, where you can lose your mind, not know who you are, and be trapped in hallucinations. Now, imagine living like that every day. That's how people with schizophrenia deal with a lot. I have a friend with schizophrenia, and I don't know how she survived it for so long unmedicated. It's pretty brutal. And so you might say, okay, that's cool. I hear you. I understand what you're saying, and this doesn't apply to me. Okay, well, if it doesn't apply to you, I'm glad that it doesn't apply to you. But what I am saying is that harm reduction is crucial, and it's very important to have a conversation on harm reduction, no matter what, whatever drug you're doing, whatever you're trying. Harm reduction is crucial to be able to maintain a sense of psychological safety and to be able to, remember who you are and to be who that is. And I think in my case, I tried so desperately to change her because of all the programming surrounded with internalized ableism that it's not okay to be who you are. And you can probably imagine how going into a trip state with that sense of anxiety that I'm not allowed to be who I am is maybe not the best starting place. And so this playlist also had other songs like Sunflower. I started seeing, I found a random bag laying in the middle of the road that had sunflowers and butterflies on it, which I thought had special meaning just for me in that state. And so many other things. As I look through this playlist retroactively, I'm just kind of torn and shocked and surprised by how many delusions the literal interpretation of these songs actually triggered in mania. And so you're probably wondering at this point, how does mania interface with shrooms? That's a question I would love to give you a better scientific answer on, but the truth is I don't completely know. I do know this. Shrooms can trigger bipolar tendencies in genetically prone individuals, and I happen to be a genetically prone individual to bipolar and adjacent bipolar-related disorders. Now, I've never been diagnosed, but that probably was something that would have been good to know beforehand. I didn't know it until after the fact. But it also leads me to question things like, to what extent does that hold? You know, how do we use this beautiful tool for trauma reprocessing in a way that will maintain the positive benefits without re-traumatization, without increasing the risks, especially in people who are genetically prone to those risks? And I don't have the best answer, but I will say this. I think that therapy is a foundation for a healthy mind. I really, truly think about therapy almost like weightlifting for the body, but for the mind, where therapy reminds you how to love yourself. And that's really important. That's an important reminder to have, because sometimes it can be easy to get trapped in the productivity challenges of our daily lives of, okay, what do I have to do next? And then especially if you have kids, you're going from one place to the next, to the next, to the next, taking your kids to school, driving your kids home from school. Constantly, you're arranging so much of your life to take care of the kids. Sometimes you need a reminder to take care of yourself. Sometimes you need a reminder that you also are worthy of being loved. And I think that's something that every human needs at our core. We need that reminder. We need that reminder that we're able to be and worthy of being unconditionally loved, which is ironically another thing I learned from psilocybin. So psilocybin has such an interesting way of revealing the things that you already believe in and the things that you already are, and that includes your dysfunctions. And so after that whole playlist mania experience, it made me realize that I had inadvertently and accidentally pre-programmed myself in advance to have a specific spiritual experience that was tied to the literal interpretation of that playlist. Like one of the songs that said, "Andy, you're a star," and I took "you're a star" literally, and I felt like I was a different person named Star. And ultimately, therapy reintegrated that too. Or rather, reintegrated her, because she really did feel individual with her own preferences and that kind of thing. But the point of all this is that psilocybin is not some kind of magic cure. It has risks. It has risks that really should be more widely known. And I'm going to put it this way. I am probably one of the biggest advocates of psychedelics that you would ever meet. But I think it's really crucial to have this conversation, to know that it's not like flipping a switch. You can't just all of a sudden erase all the trauma you've ever experienced. In fact, you actually have to trigger that neural circuit of pain in conjunction with love and connection together in order for that rewiring process to take place overall. And I would say one fast track to doing this is therapy with the right therapist and EMDR. EMDR is a fantastic tool for that. And I can't even imagine what that would be like, in a EMDR psilocybin therapy. I think that would be incredible. I think that'd be awesome, because then the brain is already primed to be in a neuroplastic state. And then you have a therapist who's teaching regulation and co-regulation strategies. And as a kind of a grounding person to be able to help you rewire things in a way that's actually healthy and not manipulative, like some of the people I met in the cult. And so I am not by any means discouraging psychedelics at all. I'm also not encouraging them. What I am saying is that if you're interested or on the fence about trying it, that you got to be aware that it comes with certain risks. And one of those risks happens to be mania. One of those risks happens to be hypomania. One of those risks also happens to be depression. It can trigger a lot of depression too, because what happens is, from a neuroscientific point of view, any drug that impacts serotonin and oxytocin can have the possible side effect of triggering oxytocin dysregulation or serotonin dysregulation. Especially with microdosing, I would be very cautious around that, because increasing serotonin in small amounts every single day or every 2 days might naturally downregulate, that's the word, downregulate serotonin receptors. So then by the time you stop microdosing, then serotonin bounces and could cause issues. Kind of a similar concept with oxytocin. If you're artificially elevating your oxytocin, over time, the body will compensate for that by downregulating oxytocin. And that's really not what you want, especially if you're already trying to resolve trauma and maybe struggling with it and looking for some way out, or even struggling with depression itself. And there are better alternatives, in my opinion. I mean, take it with a grain of salt. Either you're going to listen to me or you're not going to listen to me. But I think that it's important to recognize that it's not something that has the same effect for everybody. Just because this is what my experience with psilocybin and mushrooms was, doesn't mean that yours will be the same way. But do think about if you have a support system that would be able to support you in a situation like that. And I would venture to guess that most people probably don't. I'm honestly in a place of privilege that I even survived, that my marriage survived, that my husband was there every second to help me through mania, and that I was able to get back to baseline to be here today and talking to you. And the other thing that I want to mention, since this is Autism Advocate, I don't want people to fall into the trap of thinking that autism needs to be cured, because it doesn't. Autistic people are the way that they are. And if there are things that will make our lives easier and better, then go for it. And that's great. Keep it focused on autistic needs in that case. Don't try to completely rewire an entire system that's designed to seek out patterns and then tell it not to. What sense does that make? It doesn't. If you try to approach fixing a person, you're going to be let down. And second, you're going to get some unexpected results. And third, you probably should go to therapy if you're trying to do that to begin with. Therapy would have definitely resolved a lot of my issues and a lot of my internalized ableism with, if the world rejects me, I must not be enough. I made another video on rejection wound. Check it out if that sounds interesting to you. But in general, don't take psychedelics thinking it's going to solve all your problems without any work, because that's not how they will operate. Whatever you've been through, whatever trauma you've experienced, whatever beliefs about yourself you have, to some extent, the only way out is through. You got to re-experience it to be able to rewire it. And sometimes that re-experiencing can have a lot of side effects too. And I really hope that clarifies. I hope that it's clear at the end of this video that psilocybin is an amazing way to recreate neural contracts of your choosing, to select healthier beliefs about yourself, about the world, about others, to truly embrace your own self-love. And because it is so easy to create that plastic brain state, it should be used with an abundance of caution. Thank you.